Let's start, dear audience. Welcome to today's workshop on artificial intelligence and intellectual property law. The workshop is, as you know, hosted by CIPCO, the Center for Intellectual Property and Competition Law at Zurich University, in cooperation with the Swiss Intellectual Property Institute. And we are, as always, extremely grateful for the support by the Swiss IP Authority. As you may have gathered from the previous event or from our program or from CIPCO's website, today's event is only one in a chain. It is the second part in a research project on AI and IP and the corresponding workshop series. A third workshop will be held early in 2022, leading up to an on-site conference with the Intellectual Property Institute in summer 2022. At this occasion, next summer, we are going to review what we have learned from the online workshops and consider policy, administrative and legislative steps going forward. We have today an afternoon truly full of most interesting content before us, which is why I cut myself as short as possible now. In any case, to those logged in today, there is no need to explain why AI and IP are fascinating and important topics, especially at their intersection. Our first speaker is going to be Alessandro Curioni. He is IBM Vice President for Europe and Africa, and very importantly, Director of the IBM Research Lab in Zurich. And in these positions, he actually leads the IBM research on AI. So he's in a perfect position to now lead us through the cosmos of emerging AI technologies and applications. Please, Mr. Curioni, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share with you our vision about the future of AI, but eventually also how these connect with ethics and intellectual properties. So I hope that you are able to see my presentation. As said, I am responsible for IBM research activity in Europe and Africa, and responsible for the lab that we do have here in Switzerland, in Zurich. For the one of you that doesn't know IBM Research is a corporate research branch of IBM. We do exist since more than 75 years, probably one of the long-lasting corporate research unit in the overall industry. We do have 3,000 researchers, permanent researchers, 4,500 if you include also students and postdocs. And you know, the goal of IBM Research has been always the one to try to create the transformational innovation for the IBM company. So not eventually, to improve currently existing product and services, but to try to create the technology of the future. We do believe that, we say we want to predict the future, inventing it, okay? And what we are focusing these days is 4 major things that connect with what we are going to discuss today. First things is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, we do believe, and you do know too, is the major, most transformational technology that we do have, is going to transform the way we are doing business, the way we are living, the way we are going to create new things and intellectual properties. And it is only at the beginning, as I'm going to show to you. Second thing is computing. The evolution of computing is cloud, and we do believe that the evolution of computing, especially to empower artificial intelligence, will be hybrid cloud. You need to be able to develop something once and use everywhere easily and in the most possible secure way. Third thing, that is another transformational technology that eventually is going to impact and accelerate strongly also AI, it's quantum computing. Quantum computing is a big part of the future of computing, and while it is in the emphasis today, in the near future is going to accelerate most of the computing technology, but especially AI. And the last thing that we are focusing on, and I will spend some time in my presentation, because we do believe that it is one of the frontier and not fully explored of artificial intelligence, is how artificial intelligence is going also to accelerate the way we push the frontier of science, and we accelerate the discovery process as a whole. Okay. And while I'm going through my presentation, there will be two things that I would like always, and I will always try to touch, and I would like also that remains with you. We are in an era in which IT is developing and accelerating and creating, new impacts everywhere so fast that we do need really to have a different way to create policies. We do believe that, we have to create the right guardrails and boundaries with, precision type of regulation to allow the acceleration of this technology while, we maximize the utopic type of outcome and we minimize the dystopic ones. Okay, and there was, in our opinion, and probably you agree with us, no another era in the world, in the human life, in which technology has been shaping strongly, ourselves, our society, the way we live, the way we do business, the way we work. The second thing is that I would like, again, that we remain with you. We have been used, and eventually we have many fields in which AI is already impacting our life, but we do believe that really the new computing paradigms that are coming up, plus AI, is going really to help us to tackle the major challenges that we do have in our world, but also revolutionize, as I told you before, science and the scientific discovery process. And these are, is one thing that we have to keep in mind also when we do think about intellectual property creation and the way eventually AI is going to impact business and the world. So going back to AI. Look, I told you that we are only on the emphasis of AI. A lot happened. We do have numerous applications of AI, especially in the consumer space, right? And most of these applications are within this area that we call narrow AI. So models that have been tuned on data are very, very, very specific, are single task, single domains, and they require an enormous amount of data, okay, to create this model. So if you are able to take the models and bring to scale, like it happened in the consumer industry, you do have an impact. But, moving from this world to the world of broad AI, in which AI is going to have a larger impact in the business, require a series of developments that I will tell you, I will try to explain to you to broaden the impact of AI. We need to go from single task to multitask. We need to bring in trust, explainability, and scalability of AI, okay? We don't need eventually to get to the general AI phase to get the biggest impact. The biggest impact to the society on the business is going to be in this broaden AI phase that we are in these days, and we can accelerate if we do solve a series of problems that are in these slides. Three major ones. One I told you already, the limitation of narrow AI. Today, AI require a huge amount of data, require a lot of time and a lot of investment, and in most of the cases, right, as applications once you develop something in a single task and in a single domain. Trying to generalize this is very, 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 very important. Another piece that is super important, especially when we try to apply AI in business into the industry, is to create trust in AI. And I will spend some time, what does it mean, this, and what we can do eventually to do this. Second point is the fact that AI, as we do know today, the AI that has been powered by the deep learning revolution, require an enormous amount of computing in order, to work. Simply to train, a big transformer type of models, right? The one that are using, for example, in languages, you require the same amount of energy and therefore CO2 equivalents that you need to run, around 3 cars for a full lifetime in the world today, or a small model, the equivalent of the energy used of one household for a couple of weeks. So yes, AI can make a difference, but what we start to, and we do need to understand, and the business understand also, start to understand, is that will make a difference if the return of investment is reasonable. And when I say return of investment, it's not only a return of investment from a financial viewpoint, it's a return of investment on the sustainability viewpoint. If I tell you I can use AI to try to solve the problems of, for example, of climate change, and then the energy that I have to put in the computing, it is 10 times of the problems that I need to solve, right, is not working, right? So that is why we do need to try to solve the problems of the computational demands of the AI models today. The last thing that is a big, again, another big challenge for the application of AI in business is the scalability that I was mentioning before. It is not only having data and having enough computational power. It is also the fact that you do need a lot of time to integrate this data, to get this data, to integrate this data, to clean this data, to run this model, to optimize the model, to try to validate the models, and so on and so forth. So you need to put in an enormous also amount of human resources to get the things right today. And, business, again, is driven by return of investment. So scalability, easy to use, are fundamental pieces in order to drive AI to a larger impact in the business. So that said, what we are trying to do, and this is my view, IBM Research view, IBM view of the things and the investment that we do need to do to try to solve, or eventually try to start to solve some of the problems that I was mentioning before. And what we say is we want to push AI everywhere. We want to create a fluid intelligence. Every process, every industrial process, every business process, but also every piece of code is going to take advantage of AI. And we say, yes, AI today is code, but code, every line of code is going to be AI. So to move forward in this direction, there are 4 core themes we are working on that you see here. I'm going to enter a little bit more in details on 3 of them. One is to advance core AI. And neurosymbolics AI is one way to do it. There are many other things that we are going to, that one can do, and we are trying to do, but these bringing together the old symbolic AI and data-driven AI is going to help a lot to address many of the things that I was telling you before. Second thing is create trust in AI. Trust, and it means a series of things. I'm going to explain this to you, but it means also to get security in AI. And I want here to tell you one thing that I want you to remember. It is the first time in the era of IT in which an hacker can do a big damage without entering an IT system, without even touching directly an IT system, but simply biasing the data that goes in this AI-driven IT system. It's the first time that you can get a big impact simply biasing the input of the IT system. So there are a lot of things that we need to do. I told you about scaling. Will not enter in details, but trying to create a way to automatize the full pipeline to create AI and AI models is something that we need to do. And the last things I mentioned to you, the fact that we do need new way to run these AI models. So we do need that new way of compute, so to make AI much more sustainable moving forward. So let me enter a little bit and speak a little bit of neurosymbolic AI, one of the frontier. As I told you, it is about bringing in the good things of the database deep learning revolution with the old symbolic AI. There are certain problems in which, for example, I don't need only to understand a complex scene, a visual scene like it is here, right? Identify different objects, different colors, and do categorize those. But if I want to start to interact, bring in reasoning and start to interact with a scene like this, asking questions like, are there an equal number of large objects and metal spheres? Doing this fully data-driven, it is possible, but it's too expensive, as I told you, not sustainable. Bringing in the benefit of the old symbolic AI with the data-driven AI allow us to do this type of things much easier and faster and in a sustainable way. For example, if you have again a scene like this one and you can see the moving, right? And you like to understand and predict with AI what is happening dynamically, right? On a scene like this, for example, is going the metal sphere to collide with the red rubber sphere. Symbolic and so neurosymbolic AI will allow us to do this order of magnitude faster and better than data-driven AI. So bringing these two things together, it's one of the things that we are working on. And if you do believe, you do think about business application of AI, this merging is going to help in all the front that I was telling you before, including eventually explainability. So let me make one step forward and enter and show to you how we are focusing this, especially on the language side. We do believe that language and language processing through AI has been one of the first applications, but probably is one of the most important applications of AI for business and overall. And why? Yeah, one reason is because it allows us to create the artificial intelligence techniques that will make the interaction with humans and the IT system much easier and much effective. Okay, so application of AI on natural language processes and human computer interface. Second piece, don't forget, and this is very important also from the intellectual viewpoint, point of view, intellectual property point of view, AI can be used to automatize code development, automatize debugging, and code is a language. So usage of AI on top of this language is going to open many possible business fields and very interesting outcomes. I will spend a couple of seconds on this. The last thing is even natural sciences are described by a language. And you know, the same type of techniques that we have been developing and used to treat the natural language in which we speak, the codes can be also used to try to automatize chemistry. And I'm going to show you how. You know, all same techniques applied to language, simplify and made more effective, can have an impact on really very broad spectrum of applications. And to show you what we have done in the first field, so the application of AI on natural language processes, we have you know, a history of work in this direction, but the latest one we were able to use AI, and by the way, it's not a simple application of a single method, right? Many things that come together to create, you know, a machine that was able to do a debate with a human on very complex discussions and problems. Okay, and the machine, you know, was able to understand the topic, to understand what the human debater was saying, and eventually come up, you know, with a series of counter arguments to the human debaters that were trying really to understand and model all the human dilemma that you do have in a debate. And you know, we have done and applied these and demonstrate these few times. The most important one was the European champion of debates, and we have used the machine simply to try to have a debate if we should subsidize preschools. And you know, the debates, if you didn't hear, you can go, you find this on the web, it's very interesting. But the very important thing was the perception of the people after the debate. If you were asking, you know, who has been the better debater in terms of eventually ability to get in contact with you and change your opinion, okay? People said the human ones, okay? But if you asked which of the two, so the machine or the man, was able to bring you a better knowledge to the subject, the answer has been, you know, the machine. Okay, and this tell you how, you know, these AI machines can help us as a professional decision makers. They can help us exactly to get the knowledge that is needed to take decisions. So augment what we are doing and not substitute what we are doing. Simply, very quickly, I don't have time to enter in details, but I want to show to you that this IBM debater machine was not only a single algorithm, a single step, right? We had really a machine and a series of technology that were ingesting the data, they were understanding, you know, the arguments, they were trying to connect and create a knowledge space around this. They were getting the opponent's debater speech, analyze it, and eventually, come up with a rebuttal speech. For each of these things, you need to use different type of AI. Some are symbolic, some are data-driven, and you have to put all the things together in order to get to the goal that we had. By the way, we have, sorry, I need to go to the next slide. Yes, we have taken the same technology that was used on this debate and tried to generalize to create a tool that could help really decision makers to understand, the pros and cons of a big audience around a complex argument. And we have developed with exactly the same engine, this technology that is called speech by crowd. And this technology, how it works, you simply, formulate a statement. For example, should we continue to develop autonomous cars? Okay. And then you ask this to an audience. It can be the population, it can be your employees, it can be the parliament, and you ask them, what do you think? Yes or no, and why? Which are the reasons why you are for, and which are the reasons why you are against? The machine is able to take all these things, analyze which are the better ones, the ones that are repeated, bring all together and summarize, all the pros and cons in a single page. So if you are a decision maker, you can take all these, right, and use the summary to understand, if the decision that you are taking is based on objective fact, and if it is aligned with what your audience is thinking. And by the way, we have done even an experiment. We have done many experiments on this, but we have done one in Switzerland some times ago, indeed in Ticino, where we asked exactly this question. And from the answer, you can understand that. So the question on the autonomous vehicles, there are a series of argument, very objective, based, that the population were able to put together, and others that were against, that were really very, very emotional one, based on fears. If you bring all these things together, you understand how to drive a decision, and eventually how to correct, eventually, feeling or perception of your audience that is not based on objective fact. So moving forward, I told you same application can be used for code and for software. So same artificial intelligence on language. We had this project that is called AI for Code, that is divided into pieces. One is a database in which we have put in, 14 million code samples, 500 millions of line of codes, different program languages, and we have exposed these, and we have used it to create with AI models that helps you to do translation from a computer language to another language and help people eventually, to debug codes. You can imagine the impact of something like this, eventually even to generate a new piece of codes, the impact that can have eventually to modernize applications that were written 20, 30, 40 years ago, and eventually, the languages in which these applications were written are known now only by a very, very few number of people, right? And same things I told you, AI applied to chemistry. It's really amazing that if you take the language of chemistry, that is, chemical formula, you can translate that in sentences, and you can create models, same type of model that we are using to do language translation, to do a translation from the word, the language of the chemicals reactants to the chemicals products. And then it's like if you teach organic chemistry to a machine, and this machine can come up, if you use in the right way, with the best way to synthesize something, the best way to create a piece of matter. You know, this it's something that you have taught to the machine using data, but then it's the machine that get its own creativity in the processes. So, you know, these are new frontiers in which a simple and only focusing on the application of AI on languages can create huge impact, both to business and the industry. And by the way, I focus only on very, very, very selected cases. Let me move forward to the next one piece. I told you that we do need to create trust in AI. And you can be aware that you know, AI is something that is created on top of data, is created by human. So it's going to have in all the problems that you can find on data, on the people that are created it, and it is not by far a neutral technology if we don't work on it, right, and try to make this technology trustable. And it's very, very, very clear that, for example, one of the most important things is bring explainability to AI. We cannot have AI be black boxes. We cannot, you know, because we simply cut the possible outcome from AI, but or limit, right? But also because regulations impose us to make sure that the AI systems cannot be big black boxes, starting from the GDPR piece, right? We, as IBM, some years ago, we have started, and again, we have put on ourselves a series of principles. And by the way, this is something that companies and big companies that work on this has to do. It's not enough, as I will tell you in a few seconds, but it's something that is a must for the companies. And we have created a series of principles around AI, principle of trust and transparencies. And you can see them here. For us, AI, it's to augment human intelligence and not to substitute human intelligence. Second things on data and insight belong to their creation. Doing this, you make the full things and the chain of value better and more trustable. And of course, any new technology, including AI and any derivation, needs to be transparent and explainable. So we started with this principle, and we have worked exactly to try to implement this principle with technology. You know, the first thing is AI fair? You know, an AI model cannot be more fair than the data that you used to create the models. So there are bias in the data, you know very well. So you do need to create technology that is able to analyze the bias that you have on the data, eventually correct the bias in the data, analyze the models that you have, and correct the bias that you have in the models. We have created technology around this that is called the AI Fairness 360, and we made this technology available in the open, and we have donated to the Linux Foundation, because this is something that is important, you know, for AI at large. Same things is for explainability. We are working, and we have been working, and we are still working to try to make our model explainable. And we have created also here AI explainability 360 toolkits. Same things I said before, something that you can put on top of existing AI models to make them explainable. And same things for transparencies. You know, one thing that you can do is to try to create way as fact sheet on AI models so that you do know the origin, right? And last but not least important for sure, it's security of AI models. They are AI models, as I told you, and the systems that are based on AI can be attacked by hacker eventually simply biasing the data. So trying to understand how much your model is susceptible to this type of attack and eventually correct and cure, you know, your model along this direction is key. Also here, you know, we have created a toolkit both to help attacks both to the models and eventually to the data that are behind the model, trying to safeguard privacy. And by the way, all these things are work that happen that we have push in the open, and we have engaged a full community to make it real. So is all done? No, I do believe, as I told you at the beginning, we are also only at the beginning on these problems of having the right regulation that allow us to move forward while we put the right guardrails. And one technology that, you know, is coming in and it's very, very, very important, is neural technology, you know, trying to connect directly in a way on the other human and the computer on the AI. This technology can help really improving the quality of life of people that have inabilities. But you know, if we don't put the right guardrails, and you know, we have to do it while the technology is developing, we can have really a lot of problems that you know, they are of different types, and we do believe that what we have started to do in creating policy, interacting with the external bodies that should develop these policies at governmental level, in the academy, in the society. You know, we do need to continue to work along these directions, because that is the only way to create the right precision regulation, as I told you before, that will allow to continue to evolve the impact and the application of AI while we preserve trust. And by the way, we as a company, we have been in and have discussion and try to be present as much as possible with different groups like the European Commission Expert Group on AI, the Rome Call for Ethics, the World Economic Forum, Global AI Action Alliance, and others, exactly to try to create this synergy between companies, the government, the academy, and the society to push these things forward in the right way. Okay, so time is flying, so I'm going to fly also myself. And directly, you know, I told you about AI hardware, the problems that we do have. One thing that is very clear is that the technology, the computing technology that we have developed in the past 50, 60 years was the right technology, you know, to do what we were doing in these previous 60 years. So running databases, doing search, running analytic simulation, and so on and so forth, right? Everything that was requiring deterministic outcomes and very, very precise outcomes. AI is about classification, is about inference. You don't need to have the same type of technology, compute technology, to run this type of things. Because if you use the same type of technology, you know, you throw away a lot of energy, you throw away a lot of money. So one thing that we have started to do, and we are investing a lot, is really, you know, to think how our brain is working, and without really really needing to get, to the full understanding, we can extract certain concept that we do have in the brain that is very, very, very power efficient, by the way, the most efficient inference engine that exists, and use this concept to implement and to create the new hardware and the new IP for the AI of the future. So which are these major, guidelines? So our brain doesn't move data to do computing. He has the storage of the data and the computing exactly in the same device, okay? So that is why, one thing that we have tried to do, and by the way, it is not digital, it is analog. So bringing these things together, so bringing in the fact that we could do computation and storage of information in the same device, and we can do this in an analog way. We do believe that, and we have demonstrated, we can, speed up AI, but a 2 orders of magnitude, and make it eventually 3 or more order of magnitude efficient in terms of energy. And, this is not only on the paper. We have worked on this. We do have devices that are based on new technology, that existing technology that you can reuse in this way, non-volatile memories and resistive RAM. You can really implement devices that are able to do computation and storage on the same device. And this is, we have the first prototype of this type of compute hardware. They do exist, and these accelerators and the AI acceleration will be the future of AI computation. And we do believe, that when inserted in this hybrid cloud world, will make a difference for the application on the AI. So let's get me in the very quickly in the last piece of my presentation. I told you that we do also believe that AI is going to change the way we are doing discovery. Okay, and when I do think discovery and I think about IP, I want to map back, to the world of discovery that we do know better, that is the discovery of new materials. And I want to tell you, discovery of new materials could be the solution of many problems that we do have. Solution on CO2, the climate change, CO2 capture, solution of mobility, better battery for energy storage, solution eventually even, on farming, because we could create a new material that allow a better fertilizer, and much, much more of this. And, what we do believe, give me a few minutes on this. We do believe that AI is going, powered by all the technology that I told you before, is going really to accelerate the scientific methods. That is what you see here. And this acceleration of the scientific methods is going to accelerate the discovery of new materials that, can be the solution of problems that I told you before. And the reason why this is happening is, again, we do have better AI techniques, new AI techniques like generative models that I was mentioning at the beginning, but, synergies also with the new world of quantum computing, HPC, and hybrid cloud. And all these things together, we do believe really that if you apply these things to the scientific methods, we will be able to accelerate the process of discovery. I close here telling you that, this is not only something that is on paper or on my brain after I have drank a little bit of beers, but is reality. In the past year, exactly during the pandemic, we were really tried to put together different AI-driven tools to demonstrate that you can do this acceleration. And we have done it starting on a particular class of materials that are called photoacid generator, that are materials that are used in the semiconductor industry, are the material that you use to eventually do the lithography, the design of the circuits on the chips. Okay, and these materials, were used. Indeed, IBM invented in the 80s, but are not anymore environmental sustainable. So we needed to find new ones. So what we have done, and find new one, not in 10 years, not with 100 millions of investment, but trying to have all these in less than 1 year. And we have demonstrated in the past year that exactly using AI running on cloud as a service, we could accelerate this design cycle, ingesting knowledge much faster, enriching this knowledge and closing the gap of the knowledge using AI-driven simulation that tells me which are the simulation that I need to do to close the knowledge gap. Then using the generative models that I was telling you at the beginning, the one that, you can code chemistry, for example, based on this set of rich knowledge to create hypotheses directly using AI of possible virtual materials that have the characteristic that you need. And then eventually you take these virtual materials, and we created an engine that starting from the virtual materials encode the right chemistry and run this chemistry in a robotic engine that synthesize the material and does the test. You can do the full material discovery cycle, close the full material discovery cycle, and run using AI. And by the way, we were able to get to the solution of to get a material class for these photoacid generators in less than 9 months, where the average, as I was telling you before, was more than 10 years. And this is the chemical lab that we have here in the Zurich lab that is driven by this application that is on the cloud, that has done the synthesis and the testing of the materials. And look, I close here telling you that definitely I do believe that we are at this transition in which, from a business viewpoint, we have a data-driven, discovery and data-driven business. AI started to make a difference, but now taking AI and putting AI on the rigor of the scientific method, we enter this, discovery-driven type of enterprise where even the discovery process is going to be accelerated and automated using AI and IT. And, you can find most of the things that I told you today with much more details on this report that you find on the Ibm Research website. I close. Thank you very much for your attention. I do hope that I was able eventually to bring a little bit of data and stimulate your curiosity how AI is going to change drastically the way we are doing business tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alessandro Corioni. That was truly fascinating, and I think we could all go on listening to you for much longer. But thanks also for the timing discipline and stopping at the point where much more could be said. I already have many points that we may address in our panel discussion later on, including the question why you seem to believe in explainability of AI systems, while, for example, many competition law colleagues of ours think that these are all black boxes and they're terrible, so we need to best prohibit them altogether because we will not be able to understand them at all. So this is an interesting field. I also see that my CIPCO colleague Florent Touvenin, who is running this workshop series with me, has joined quite a while ago, and he's He's an expert on the EU AI ethics, the experts group, and the guidelines they issued. And this will certainly, give a raised hand later on from him. And so there are many more things. But I'm not going to monopolize the discussion. I take a look at the chat and see that we have one raised hand from Anthony Trippe or Tribe, and then we have a remark, but I think that's not a question. So I think we take your question, Anthony, and there we have a question whether you could repeat the name of the report you mentioned, Alessandro Grüne. Maybe you can just write it in the chat. I think it's interesting to everybody. So Anthony, please, your question, and then we may go on, but if there is one or two more very urgent questions, you can also take them, please.
Thank you very much. And Alessandro, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Anthony Trippe. I run the machineLearningForPatents.com website. We're doing a webinar series for all these different tools. So it was fascinating to see some of the different applications you have here. But I have a question specific to patents. Some years ago, we heard some presentations about a patent-related Watson-driven AI associated machine learning associated system for identifying prior art, for searching chemical substances. But I didn't hear you mention that in your presentation today. Do you have any sort of an update on what sort of commercial systems IBM might be bringing to this particular market, the patent practitioner market?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Look, one thing that we are trying to do now, it's exactly to expose and eventually make available all basic pieces of technologies, okay, that can help eventually to do what we are doing. No specific super specialized version of these tools and software. And the major reason is that, even with patents, depending on what you want to do, right, the solution that you have to create will require, different nuances and different care of different type of aspect, right? So there are basic technology, for example, the one that I was mentioning on creating this AI model for chemistry is something that we wanted to do, and we have used IBM AI technology available on the cloud exactly to do extraction of all the organic chemical reaction that were available on patents. Okay, so these things are there and you can use it, but you don't have, very specialized solution, because being specialized require a huge investment, and eventually maybe they don't get what you want, or another person wants, or another company wants. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I think we have one more question that we can take now, and it comes from Jonathan Poritz. I don't know whether you see it in the chat. As a computer scientist, or Jonathan, would you want to go for yourself with your question?
Sure, I'm happy to. I just, Alessandro, I don't really understand kind of the overall philosophy of some of this work. It seems like if I just do a string substitution in your talk with the phrase AI and replace it with a large-scale statistical model, everything you say technically is kind of the same. And it just means when you use phrases like the machine understands organic chemistry or something, yes, it seems like you're anthropomorphizing it. If you said a large scale statistical model gives you useful predictions in the organic chemistry, that would be.
No, it's not the case here. Okay. And in fact, what you do use there is, these last generation transformer models that are based on evolution of deep learning, and in other case generative models, right, that are evolution of the data-driven deep learning AI, and you know, it has nothing to do, you know, with do anything else, you know. And if you go back to terminology, you can say everything and the contrary of everything. But the reality is that these latest things that I have shown, for example, on chemistry, is something that we can do this now. In the past 2 years, we were not able to do using standard deep learning things, and we could not able to do with using any symbolic base type of old AI. You know, it's then is a question. It is all mathematics based on knowledge. Yes, that's is the reality.
Okay, so we may see further discussions on that point as well later on. For now, I would like to pass on the word to our next speaker, Alisa Dali from the UN World Intellectual Property Organization, Wipo. She's a senior policy officer in the IP and Frontier Technologies division of Wipo. And she's actually one of Wipo's key experts on AI and IP, and having co-written, amongst other things, the organization's much noticed report on the matter. I think very many of you will know the report, so here's one of the mothers of it. And we are very proud that you're with us and that we hear from you on trends in patenting related to AI. Alessandro Coglioni told us much about, you know, the sharing of knowledge and open source approaches, as it were. But sometimes companies do still seek intellectual property rights on that sort of stuff, and we'll hear from you what the large trends are in that field. Please.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I would just like to say that I wish we had all those chemistry things when I was doing my PhD in chemistry. It would have definitely made things way easier for me. So I'm glad that the students these days have that on board. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk to you about some of the trends in patenting activity related to AI. I know I've seen a few names on the chat and the participant list. I know a lot of you have probably very familiar with this, and I hope you bear with me and feel free to ask me challenging questions at the end, but it's going to be a very, very brief because I know we've got a lot of things to talk about. I'm just going to skip that one. So the reason that we did this report, the Wipo Technology Trends on Artificial Intelligence, is because we wanted to have a factual basis for the policy discussions regarding innovation and artificial intelligence. So in order to see that there is evidence of the use of the IP system, in particular to protect innovations resulting from AI, we wanted to provide this analysis of AI technologies. And this report was published in January 2019. So although it's a little dated in terms of the data, it still is a very good evidence source, and it does also hopefully bring clarity to the global debate and also to the discussions that you're going to be having at the national level in Switzerland. That being said, there have been a number of updates in various countries. If any of you are interested in that, I have shared these slides with Martin, so you will be able to see these reports and be linked to these reports after my presentation. So we found very briefly, we did a search for what we thought was artificial intelligence and all sort of related terms to artificial intelligence in both the patent corpus and also in a scientific publication corpus. And we found that since artificial intelligence emerged in around the 1950s, that innovators and researchers have filed patent applications or patent families for almost 340,000 AI-related inventions. And they have published over 1.6 million scientific publications in that time. What we see when we look at that over time is, despite the emergence of the technology in the 1950s, or the understanding of what artificial intelligence would bring in the early time, the AI-related patents only really took off after 2013. And not only did patents relating to AI begin to grow in 2013, but they skyrocketed. And one of the most striking findings from our report is that about half of all AI patents were published in the last 5 years of the data that we found in the report, so 2012 to 2017. And this is quite a remarkable illustration of how rapidly innovation is happening within the field of artificial intelligence. And while you can see from this graph that while scientific publications on AI kind of took off around 2001, which is approximately 12 years in advance of the surge, we kind of put this difference between scientific publications and patent families as the change in orientation of research in artificial intelligence. So in scientific publications, we're looking at more theoretical research into artificial intelligence, whereas there's been a shift, or there's been enough research in the academic community that can then be applied to industrial settings. And so what we've seen is about a 10-year lag between this boom in scientific publications to the boom in patent applications. And therefore now we are seeing a much greater interest in the practical use of AI technologies. And by practical use, it's something that is eligible to be protected by a patent. When we did our search, we broke down the patents into various categories, patents and scientific publications. We reviewed existing definitions and approaches on how AI technologies are classified. However, we face a little bit of a challenge in that there's no worldwide scheme that is accepted for classifying AI technologies. And with that, there did not exist at the time appropriate classifications for patent data. There have been updates to the international patent classification since we did this search. So there are now AI-related patent classifications that make things easier, but when we did this search, they were just only being introduced. We started with the established classification scheme from the Association for Computing Machinery, and that had been developed over the past 50 years. It was updated in 2012, but then we had to adapt it to take account of more recent technology developments, such as deep learning, and we also made a flatter hierarchy because that suited more the purposes of our report. And not only that, we had to add a third, so from the ACM, we have AI techniques, which are advanced forms of statistical and mathematical models, such as machine learning. And then we have different AI techniques, which may be used to implement different AI functional applications. So functional applications is the second classification. These are functions such as speech generation or computer vision, which can be realized using one or more AI techniques. And the third dimension is one that we added particularly for patents, which is basically the industries in which AI is applied, or in how we've called it here, application fields. So these are different fields or areas where AI techniques or AI functional applications may be used, such as we've had this great example, chemistry or debating, but also transportation, agriculture, and other medical sciences as well. And so it was this addition of the application fields that was one of the things that Wipo brought to the taxonomy of AI. So that gives you a kind of brief idea of how we classified the patents. So now I'm going to give you an idea of which are the biggest technologies that are subject to patenting activity. So within AI techniques, Machine learning is by far the most dominant AI technique, and it's the only one that also has shown, which showed significant increase over the last 10 years or so. Machine learning represents about 89% of all patent families related to an AI technique, and about 40% of all the patent families in our study. And out of those 134,000 that you can see on the screen there, about 64,000, so around half, were filed since 2012. So again, that big spike in the last 5 years of the data that we have. Within machine learning, the most pronounced increases during the study period were neural networks and deep learning. We used an average annual growth rate over a 4-year period to measure these increases. And to give you an idea, so we've got here 46% increase of neural networks and 175% increase for deep learning. And if you compare that to the increase in the number of patents filed around the same period, it's about 10%. So you can see that like 175% is massive increase compared to all patent filings. Around 75% of all AI patents have a functional application. The largest area, which I have on this, is computer vision, which is mentioned in almost 50% of all AI-related patents. And the emerging areas within functional application, the biggest growth areas are robotics and control methods. Control methods are very frequently used within transportation, which we can see from the next slide is one of the application fields with the most patents. So the biggest industries are transportation and telecommunication, which have around 50,000 patent filings each in the whole period. But transportation also grew the most in the last 5 years of the reporting period. And to also give you a little idea, I've only included one of these slides which breaks down the bigger categories into little categories, but there's many of these breakdowns within the report. We looking at the subcategories within, in this case, application fields, in this case, transportation. We can see that when you look at the growth rates in the kind of subcategories in the most recent years, we see that aerospace and avionics, it has the highest annual growth rate of 67%, which is followed by autonomous vehicles with 42%. Although autonomous vehicles is the biggest subset, we can see that there's other areas within transportation that are becoming more important. When we look at patent data, we also look at the applicant data to determine who the key players in the field are, as well as the type of organizations that are innovating in a field. This helps policymakers kind of decide perhaps where to best implement their policies, depending on what they are trying to achieve. We found that overall, companies represented 18 out of the top 20 patent applicants, while only 2 of the top 20 are public research organizations. This pattern we saw apply across most AI techniques, applications and fields, and private sector, so companies represent about 2/3 of the top 500 applicants. We see on the graph here that IBM and Microsoft have the biggest patent portfolios, and both their portfolios span a very wide range of AI, indicating that these companies are not really limiting their activity to a specific industry or field. And I guess Alessandra has really shown us that that is the case. And most of the big corporations, and particularly the big tech corporations, seem to have portfolios that spread across a wide range of industries. The Chinese Academy of Sciences is the leading academic player. They have over 2,500 patents, and although I'm not showing it, they're also the biggest filer of scientific publications. And although I mentioned like IBM and Microsoft, for example, they have quite wide-ranging patent portfolios. There are within even the top 20 some companies that have very high degrees of specialization and expertise in their fields. So for example, we have Toyota, which is very, very prominent in transportation, which is probably very obvious to you, but it's sometimes very good for things that seem obvious to be backed up by science, by data. We have Siemens and Philips and Samsung, which are quite specialized in life and medical sciences, not Samsung, just Siemens and Philips. And also Facebook and Tencent are very specialized in networks, which with social networks in particular. So what we can gain from this is that industry expertise and therefore access to specialized data within industry, it can explain why these certain companies are very dominant in their fields, even within artificial intelligence, where they may not be computing or artificial intelligence companies themselves. I just wanted to include one figure that mentions Switzerland, but this figure is from the OECD report that I mentioned as one of the follow-up reports to what we did. They have a slightly different search strategy, but the general trends are very, very similar. And what we can see from this graph, we are looking at the share of AI patents in IP5 patent families by country. So an IP5 patent family is when an applicant has filed in the US, the EPO, China, Korea, and Japan. So it indicates that it's a valuable patent. They've spent all this money to file it in 5 jurisdictions, and therefore probably a quality invention. And what we can see from this graph, we've got the dot is 2004 to 2006, and then the bar is 2014 to 2016, so 10 years later. And we can see that most countries have increased their share of AI patents as a proportion of all patents filed in that country. And we can see Switzerland is down 2 on from Belgium, which is red if you can't read it, which has gone from about the same. So it's about 0.5% of their share of total patents to, and that hasn't changed much over the time. It's just kind of an indication that, you know, if there's a change in emphasis in a country on a certain technologies, and you know, this can be driven by many things. So, you know, there could have already been a lot of investment in AI, particularly, say, for example, in Ireland, that has therefore increased the number of AI patents filed by Ireland as a proportion of their whole patent portfolio. So it's really, many things could be read from this, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of how this looks in various different jurisdictions. So what do we do now that we have all this evidence of where AI is being commercialized? We put AI technologies into perspective, and then you can make policy decisions or assumptions or direct funding, or for example, in many different policy areas. So these are various different policy areas that are kind of related to AI, but not necessarily just to patents, but also to other things that can be regulated, like ethics and data security, for example. So we have to be careful and about making any decisions about regulations, about artificial intelligence in isolation. So we can't make decisions necessarily in the IP world without considering the implications that may have in other areas. So it's a whole economy-wide policy decision, so that, you know, although we have to perhaps make decisions quickly, because AI is changing a lot of technologies very quickly, we don't want to kind of do a piecemeal approach and only do IP and then have to kind of catch up with other things later on. But what we have hoped to have done with the technology trends report is to kind of offer insights into the trends that are currently happening in AI innovation, and therefore maybe some areas that need to be targeted as priority areas for regulation. That being said, within IP policy, and I'm not going to really discuss this, I know this is probably going to be discussed or has been discussed in many other areas, but there are a lot of different intellectual property rights that are impacted by a lot of different parts of artificial intelligence, and we are very cognizant of that at Wipo, and I know a lot of other IP officers, and I know some of you on this call, but of course definitely the Swiss office, of thinking very carefully about these things, and which we are very happy about and very happy to support. And within this work over the last almost 2 years or so, we have had what we have called the Wipo conversation on IP and artificial intelligence. And this has been a way that we have been able to discuss some of those issues on the previous slide, now that we have evidence that AI is definitely influencing or impacting the IP system. So at the end of 2019, we published a list of issues related to AI for the IP system. And then we discussed those in 2 meetings last year, 2 sessions of the Wipo conversation. We have a lot of information about that online. And I know that a lot of jurisdictions are using that to kind of think about what they're doing with their legislation. But I also know that a lot of companies are looking at some of the discussions that we were having to make sure that they are future-proofing some of their IP strategies. But we haven't, unfortunately, we haven't followed up along a lot of that this year, because we have actually changed the scope of our work, particularly my division. So now we are the Frontier Technologies and IP division, and we're looking at all frontier technologies, so including still artificial intelligence, but also things like quantum computing and genetic engineering, all sorts of things like that. But what we have focused on, or what we are focusing on right now, is actually the one of the biggest, what we consider one of the biggest drivers of frontier technologies, and that is data. And I'd like to just inform you all that we are having the next session of the Wipo conversation next week, which will be on data, and you are all welcome to attend. The registration is online, and we'd love to see you there if you are interested. So that has been a very, very brief introduction, refresher on the trends in AI patenting. And like I said, there's a lot more information in the report, and also ongoing work at Wipo can be available at this short link. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was wonderful, a wonderfully concise overview on this vast field, and also very the report, which is very rich in content. So that was really a very good overview. You know, one may be a little bit concerned about Wipo's focus on AI in particular, but it hoped that the organization maintains this as an active focus of its work. I also found it quite interesting to see, the Swiss data on the graph, which is not bad, but probably could be more proactive, so to speak. So this also, relates to the underlying question of this entire exercise here, namely whether the legal and economic framework in Switzerland for AI and IP is optimal, or whether some adjustments will have to be made. So that was very interesting, and also I'm looking very much forward to the next Wipo conversation next week. And with that, I check the chat and don't see a very urgent question right now. So I would suggest, as we are already listening for quite a while to very concentrated presentations, that we take a 5 minutes break now, just to get a fresh coffee and think about the questions we bombard the speakers with later on. And then we'll be back for 2 more industry views from Ernie and Siemens after this break. Looking forward to it, and I'd say we reconvene at 4:30, 16:30. See you then on these issues. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been very interesting. Thanks to everybody for these great talks, and thank you for having us here. I'm now maybe going to answer some questions in the sense of what do business cases look like for smaller companies, like not for the business leaders like Siemens and IBM. Siemens and IBM, we have heard from, they are working with cutting edge technology. They're the big players. And us, Ernie, we are a software company which we deliver software and business know-how. We work with maybe mid-sized companies to big companies, but maybe not the business leaders that work with AI cutting edge technology. So I will give here the viewpoint from those companies, right? And I have selected a use case that I will go deep dive into it. So you will see, like, how does the business have to think about the case when we are working with AI? Yeah. So quickly to our company, we are called Ernie, or Ernie in English. It's founded in Switzerland, in Zurich in '94. And we are about 800 employees worldwide. You can see the map here across the globe. And we are active in 18 offices around these countries. We are active in 6 industries. I'm gonna get the laser pointer here. And we are in industry, in manufacturing industry, in health and medtech, transport, logistics, and others. And we manage about 150 projects yearly. As I mentioned, our clients are from different industries, such as medtech and finance. And let's say our typical client is mid-sized company. And now I want to talk about how are we with our clients and with our partners together trying to kind of exploit this revolution of the digital revolution, which includes AI from my point of view, and namely machine learning. As we have heard before, machine learning is now the most prominent case, machine learning algorithms of AI that is arriving to the companies of every level. And I'm going to talk mainly about the meta case. I kind of elaborate a bit. If I think time is a bit short, maybe I'm going to skip over the finance. We will see. I think I can get across my points anyhow. I will show you what's the business case, including AI, what we have to look out for if we are basically a normal player in terms of AI in the industry, and what technologies and resources are critical here. Yeah, quickly to myself, as you have mentioned earlier, I've been in cancer research. I've been trained as a biologist and informatician quite a while back, and then exited research in that sense after almost 10 years, and went into the data science consultancy industry. And now I'm here with Ernie, bringing this know-how to our clients. I'm going to first talk about test strip analysis. This is a case which I think is kind of typical, which we encounter a lot of times. And this is from the medtech industry. And it's about these little test strips. You can see here these colored boxes, which are used for kind of analyzing in this case, urine samples. So we can do, for example, urine samples with these little test strips. Some of you may have taken these. You just dip this within the samples you provide, and they are around for a long time already. So this is established technology. And they're used, for example, in screening for routine examinations, in treatment monitoring, which will be very important, and general preventive medicine. So in summary, they are used for checks, diagnosis, and monitoring. And they have lots of readouts. You can see here, like in this specific case, we have about 11 readouts. There are many different tests on the market. And as I said, they're on the market since the 50s of the last century. And so there's many applications. But the point here is that normally a medical professional or a lab technician has to do this readout. There are some cases where a patient is used to using them and can do it themselves, but normally you need a professional to do this readout. And now you can maybe already guess where the AI may come in. But first, I'm gonna just take a quick look. So in general, in the field of the medicine and treatment, there's the telematic medical applications that are on the surge, and they promise let's say rapid analysis and maybe more standardized data from the test results. For our example here, what we can say is that the monitoring can and is increasingly done telematically. And why? This is because the evaluation, if you use technology, is done instantly. And you can do this, in this case, you can do this computationally, as you can imagine. So we can take this ketone test, which you can check if there's a high sugar level, or if you are in danger of having diabetes, or you want to monitor this, then you can check this test result, which will change the color if you dip it into the sample. And then you will check, oh, will it be more like the third or the fourth shade? And this can be done computationally. And in that sense, we can also argue this will provide more standardized results than if all the medical stuff does. The medical stuff is varying. Some days this person is here, and other days that person is here. And here is important to note that also, for example, in Europe, 8% of the males have a red-green deficiency, right? So the color vision is not as as unique, not as standardized, even in the human population. So I speak from experience. I have a red-green deficiency. I can go through life normally, but I will not be naming colors here right now. So, but other than that, the argument here is that if you use always the same models to the same kind of image, it will give you a very standardized and robust result. And then, of course, then the business case itself. You want to monitor test results from your patients, and maybe in real time. So this is basically what I want to talk about. Normally, the case is not the AI itself. It's some business problem, right? But then it will depend on the AI or the machine learning algorithm that's in the background. That's basically the typical scenario for clients we have. So if you look at the customer journey, which is the business case, just to make the argue how it will improve, you have to leave home, you have to go to doctor's office, you wait your turn, there's always waiting involved, and then you take the test, you provide the sample to the staff, they analyze it, they give you the information, and you go home, or the other way around. And if you, for example, you can monitor from home via a mobile app, let's say, you install the app, you connect to the server, and then this is one time. You just take the test, use the camera or the app of your mobile phone, and then it will give you feedback instantly. And also you can wait for additional feedback from your physician in that sense. So here the point I want to make is this is a nice business case. You know, you can kind of gain traction with it from funding, because this was with a startup, and this will play a role in a minute. And the whole case depends on the fact that it works technically, right? So now the AI comes into play. And what is important here? Like, we have to take into account that the solution needs to run in different environments. So if you make these mobile-based apps, you have different hardware that you work with different ambient lights around where the patient takes the picture. And that's maybe a technical hurdle you have to take into account. So this basically has the impact then when you, for example, go and look for a representative data set here, you have to take into account that you have can have a lot of different lightnings and light conditions, and you will have lots of different tests here. So then here we have the next invest that you have to plan when you build such a business case, is that, do we have the data? And for some data, for some cases, you can actually go and use public data, but for most cases, you need to build on your own data you have in your company. And if not, especially for startups, you need to ask yourself, where does the data come from? I want to stress this because when we need to create our data, if like we work with the company, I cannot create this data. We need patient data, right? So we need to go into collaborations and with, let's say, patient associations or with the hospitals that generate the data, and then we need to make sure who has the right on this data. And that's maybe the most crucial part here for this round, right? Because if I develop a solution, a machine learning model on this data, I kind of want to make sure I remain with this competitive advantage of having this high quality data. Let's say I'm gonna go to next. So I have this high quality data from these test tips that I generated, and I would like to be the owner, right? So that is the question: how much do we need to invest to either create or purchase, or at least show rights on this data? That's maybe something that's not often talked about, but for small companies, this is a huge issue in that sense. Then on a more technical term, then you need to figure out what algorithms do I need, right? So is it difficult? Is it not difficult from a technical point of view? Let's say color calibration for the different light conditions. We can say, okay, these white strips can serve as a reference point. We know what this white look like, and we can get these test results and check make the color calibration. There is standard libraries available. We can license them and use them. And then we go into the object detection. And now again, the AI will play a role. Object detection is a field, there's machine learning models, pre-trained models, as mentioned in the earlier talk, which we can use for free because they're provided to us by the big players in the AI industries, namely Google, for example. They give us the ResNet model and with the TensorFlow machine learning library, right? So we can use them. And this is a very, very big point on this whole business case, because there we don't need to kind of account for that we need to develop very, very complex model. Normally it's about going to the literature, check what models will surface best. We tinker around and check what works. So from that point of view, we use what's like been given to us, right, from companies like Siemens or IBM or Google, from the point of view of a smaller company that wants to kind of exploit the advancements of AI, right? As soon as such technologies then become again closed, then we are kind of off the hook of the how we can exploit them, right? Yeah, and then for the specific case, we go further. We have detected these squares with the object detection. So we like the machine cuts out all these squares. It will say, here you have your 11 tests, and now we have to train 11 different models, each one for. So let's say here's the blood test, and then we need to teach the machine, yeah, this blood test we need to be able to distinguish into 4 classes, 4 levels of blood and urine, etc. For example. And then you go to the libraries which are available and apply them. Yes, I think we're a bit short on time. Is that correct?
I think you can take certainly for the finance 5 more minutes. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
does that help you or? Yeah,
okay, no, that's good. I'm just saying I'm going to briefly explain another case. So here the problem was a bit different one, right? The banks, they have a very close relationship with their clients. So I found statistics that the Britons, for example, they are 70 years loyal to their bank, while only 11 years in their marriage, like loyal to their spouse. So meaning that the bank relationship is longer lasting than your marriages, which is in some sense great for banks, but it's problematic if clients hop off. You will not get them back so quickly, right? So there's a major resources can be poured into how do we maintain our clients, and particularly clients change their banks when there's big events in their lives. I go out of university or apprenticeship and get my own salary, And there is basically our case. So the banks want to make sure that the clients know their portfolio, that they have solutions for their new life in that sense, and don't go to a competitor, right? Because normally the young customers are in investments from the bank point of view. And just very quickly here, there's a different scenario. The data we would like to need for the case is the client transactions and the metadata. So the bank this is now a big player, a bigger company, let's say. They have their data and there's not a bottleneck that we have the data. So basically, what they said, look, we want to offer to the clients statistics about peer groups, comparisons. Let's say, dear young client, you can opt into the service, and you will see like you spend like the average amount of money in reference to your peer group for meals and groceries, right? But you spend like more than average for traveling. And then we can basically develop machine learning algorithms and say, first discover what products work very well with this group, and then place recommendations. So this is maybe more a marketing approach of a machine learning and recommendation machine, right? So, and once you can say, look, okay, you and your peer group, there we know that the credit card works very well because you travel a lot and there's low interest in different currencies. Maybe we recommend this to you, and then we can evaluate these recommendations. So basically the case here is just different from the one before, that we have the data. That basically the very important intellectual part is how do we split up the data? So what data do we derive from our customer transactions? The rest, again, there is patents from Amazon regarding recommendation machines, etc. But normally we can use standard libraries because it's not technically it's not a cutting edge tech project we are doing here. We just want to do some recommendations and have some statistics what could be best. But so here the intellectual part is how do I actually split up my data, analyze my data, learn from data. That's the point I wanted to make here. So yeah, just to close up, take-home messages for the companies that are not Siemens or IBM. The big important issue is that what is available for us in terms of open source licensing. This is dominating all industries in that sense. We just have the pre-trained models at our disposal because the know-how of how to create our own networks and complex algorithms isn't necessarily there, and many business cases would not be would not have a return of investment that's reasonable. So a lot of business cases are actually assume that we have tools available and we are literate, or we have a literate service provider such as Ernie that can deal with these algorithms, right? Solutions that are being developed, I didn't mention this before, but they can be basically offered behind APIs. These are endpoints in the internet. So when we think about the test strip project, we just can offer from the app that cuts out the little test, sends it to the server, there is the model. We don't have to kind of distribute it because it just sends back the results. It takes in the data, sends back the results, and we don't need to, first of all, distribute our model. And secondly, data, which is the most valuable part of all this, is now my personal opinion, obviously, that if you don't have the data, we are not able to use all these algorithms which are there. So there's like our experiences that this handling of the data, the creation of the data, and how the data needs to be enriched and analyzed, this part is oftenly underestimated for the cases that are being realized out there. So this is a big part which is very important in your business case, and then also obviously now from a layman's perspective, very much in need of protection if you want to have this competitive advantage. Yeah, and in the end, it's from a business perspective, it's about having the data, developing the product, and with embedded in a good application and APIs, you will be able to generate more users, gain more users, and generate more data. But you have to enter this cycle before you can actually start here. Yes, that's a bit the viewpoint from other players in the industries, and I very much enjoyed here the points from my previous speakers. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael Schreiber. This was wonderful. Such a clear and important contrast, in a sense, to the presentations from the large companies, the kind of frontier companies we heard before. Very well made points and points that give a lot of food for thought, especially also relating, of course, to IP protection and accessibility of such intangible resources. And I could right away dive in questioning you on many aspects of your presentation, but I think it makes a lot of sense to hear from the economists first and then discuss their points and yours together. And with that, if you agree, I would right away give the floor to our final pair of speakers, namely Naomi Hefner, who is a professor of technology management at St. Gallen University, where she heads the Emerging Technologies Lab and focuses her work, as I understand, on the implications of artificial intelligence on management and innovation. And then last but in really no way least, Martin Bada. I'm not actually sure I really have to introduce him, but I'll do it anyway. Even in this peer group, he is a partner and co-founder of the Innovation Intellectual Property Management Advisory Group BAG, and also professor for technology management at the University of Applied Sciences in Ingolstadt. And previously, he was, as many of you know, head of the Intellectual Property Management Competence Center at St. Gallen University and Chief Intellectual Property Officer at Infineon. So again, we have the combination of practical experience and scientific knowledge, and very much of that. He has an impressive stock of publications, and he's in a row of years, I think, now considered as one of the world's leading IP strategists by those rankings done in that area. So great that you will give us the macroeconomic perspective, maybe, as it were, and especially speak a little bit about whether IP has a changing role in the markets that we have been hearing about from the company representatives. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting the both of us. So yeah, as you wished, we will try to kind of combine a perspective that takes a broader economic view, and I am fairly certain we will touch on some of the points that were just raised during the two presentations, at the very least by our industry representatives. So one of the things that I wanted to start off with was to just set the frame by explaining that we kind of really look at AI as being at least an enabling technology, if not a general purpose technology, which for those of you who will know, this really means for our purposes that they kind of fulfill three criteria. So on the one hand, they are in wide use, which we see as starting to happen. And certainly there's a potential for pretty much AI to be used in almost any area that you can imagine. So that criteria seems to be fulfilled. Then there's a second point of AI being capable of, or general purpose technologies rather, being capable of continually being improved, technically speaking. And we're seeing that this is still the case. In fact, some of the most recent developments that have really pushed AI to the forefront that it's at now are rather recent developments, right? So we've had deep learning only being enabled around 2009, 2012. With some of these cool computer vision applications that we've seen coming, and then more recent developments like the transformer models or generative adversarial networks, which are much more recent. And I'm sure we will continue to see developments in this area as we go forward. And then finally, and this is probably maybe the biggest question mark right now, which is why it's still a little bit up in the air, whether we can really consider AI a true blue general purpose technology, but this is that there are a lot of complementary innovations that go along with AI that really drive this technology. So to also summarize, we see that one of the big potentials for this enabling general purpose technology is that it's really a prediction technology, and it's really enabling the efficiency and sort of supercharging prediction. And of course, as we all know, this is a huge part in a lot of areas in business and society. And so what we're seeing is that these newest versions of machine learning models that we have are really pushing the performance levels in terms of prediction. So specifically, what we can see is that while we had these traditional AI models, and by this I mean sort of more basic regression-based approaches, so things like support vector machines too, these had some level of performance, right? But you know that at some point collecting more data doesn't help much. And what we're seeing now that we have deep learning neural network-based approaches, that performance can really accelerate pretty dramatically as we get both more data and bigger networks. And so specifically some of the newest advances that we've had, like the transformer network. So as a very extreme example, GPT-3, which was developed by OpenAI, which has 175 billion parameters, an absolutely enormous network with all of essentially Reddit and other data fed into it, is able to make very exciting and accurate predictions in terms of speech prediction, I suppose you would call it. So this brings me to a next point that we are considering when we talk about this. You will notice with some of the use cases that you see for AI.
Just very briefly, I
Sure.
don't know whether you want already share your presentation.
Yes, of
I'm
course.
not seeing one, but that
I
maybe
did meant to start that and then blanked in the middle. Yes, excuse me. Okay, so this was the graph that we have where we can see that AI is really getting more and more powerful as it's increasing in size and scope. So our next point is this about data network effects, which we think could be classified as a new type of network effect. So you will already know that a lot of the companies that have grown very large and influential, so companies like Facebook and Amazon, run on network effects, and these are usually traditional network effects. So these are like direct network effects, which are the result of consumers getting more value from joining a network. So as more people have a telephone, if I can communicate with these other folks, it becomes more valuable. And then also indirect network effects, like you would see on something like Apple's App Store, where there are more and more complementary products that you can get by joining the network because there are other providers who feed this value into the network. And so what we see with AI is if you have platforms that are built on AI systems, you actually have these so-called data network effects, which means that by having more data that feeds into the AI platform, the service that the platform provides in and of itself gains in value for customers. And this brings me to my next point of what are sort of the implications of thinking about these developments. So on the one hand, I would urge businesses to keep in mind these data network effects when they design their business models. And then more generally, we can kind of look at what sort of different assets in terms of intellectual property we have when we develop an AI system. So everybody will probably be familiar with this pretty regular representation of a neural network on the left. And if we take a more generic approach at, and this is a very generic process, I'm sure our practitioners will be able to tell you that there's a little more involved than just doing these 3 steps here. But at the very core of it, what we're using is a bunch of data. So the data set, we're using a type of training approach to teach our AI system various relationships upon which it can make predictions, and it's going to make those predictions using this model here at the very end. And what's interesting when we look at these different assets is that obviously with data, and this has been discussed, it's extremely valuable. And also there are more rules about what you can do with this data and how you have to treat it. So data privacy issues, et cetera, that you need to consider. And what's interesting is this training aspect, which our practitioner presentations just reminded us, this is still a very much non-trivial issue. So it's not just a matter of plugging and playing. But what's also interesting is if you look at how this training step is treated, this is something that a lot of companies who are developing AI systems actually publish research on training and best practices in this area, which you can use as a basis when you develop your own systems. And then I think the trickiest part is really this model part here at the end, which is actually still very much kept secret, if you will. Michael Schröder, I think, explained that there are absolutely open source models, but there are, of course, also other situations. So for instance, GPT-3, which I just mentioned, Microsoft actually paid, I think, $1 billion last year to exclusively license this model and offer it to its customers through its cloud. And so this is a very interesting aspect where we see there are some real implications for competitive advantage, because the model is really the core of what allows you to make these powerful predictions. But it's also a bit difficult to share these models at the moment. So Martin's going to dive into some more thoughts on this.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, when we talk about competitive advantage, we might sort of don't have to go back so far in history. Also from an academic point of view, a lot of research has been done on what is sort of, or what's the role of competitive advantage. And one of the forerunners in describing this was Joseph Schumpeter, who actually described various sorts of monopolistic practices, which today sound, of course, very bad, especially for, I think, for the team of CIPCO. But basically, Schumpeter already mentioned patents as one of these practices. And at the same time, Schumpeter described that basically these monopolistic practices are necessary for companies to be what they are, to create sort of a purpose in terms of a monetary purpose and earnings. So basically, if we were talking about physics, we would say, well, this is like sort of the energy we need to move on. And in an economic sort of view, Schumpeter really described that companies need this practices or need this advantage, this competitive advantage, to sort of create the economic value they are doing. And at the same time, Schumpeter also mentioned sort of what's the purpose for the society to have these kind of companies just sort of earning money. So it was not just a pure capitalistic view, but there it was also already mentioned, and many studies today actually support this, that these competitive advantages create an incentive for those companies or players to create inventions that would foster technical progress. And in a third step, this would be seen as sort of the basis for growth and prosperity of an economy. So please don't judge this. This is not correct sciences. The economy sciences. This sort of we call the social sciences. But if we go back, why do we have the patents? And that's what we wanted to sort of to state here today, is because we have the understanding that sort of the protection of this monopolistic, or at least some of the monopolistic practices under certain sort of framework or frameworks, would create an incentive for companies to thrive for technical progress that would be seen as a basis for growth and prosperity of an economy. But of course, we have also to mention, Schumpeter described this for a while. At that time, we had the sort of, you can still think of the sort of steam engine and the textile industrialization, and where you could still see the technical progress in the machine by having sort of how many wheels and how the wheels are turning. And opposite to that, a little bit later, about 100 years later, almost 100 years later, a second person described something what was paving the term open innovation. I guess most of you have heard about it. And Henry Jasperow described this when he investigated why successful companies are innovative. He realized that those companies seem to have a certain secret sauce, which then turned out not to be this secret. But in terms of why they were successful, he discovered they were not just working in their own boundaries. They were not creating their innovations purely on their own, but in collaboration with other partners. So by opening up the innovation process. But of course, open here, as he described it and discovered it, would already start, open will already start if you have a number of two. So open could also mean that you have a very secret collaboration between two parties. But still, it was a move on away from the closed innovation paradigm as the one that Schumpeter described was used to. So and why I'm mentioning this here? Because as you can see, there are obviously two concepts that are both working. So when we talk now about IP and AI, one question is, of course, how do, please go on, Naomi, thanks. So we can ask, okay, why do we have this, or how do those two concepts come into place here? And one is that we heard just beforehand is also what we can call an open or a common strategy, where you have at least somehow a shared asset basis. Alessandro Coglioni mentioned at the beginning, at least how I understood it, three activities where they started sharing their outcomes, like the Fairness 360 program, the Expandability 360 concept, and the Fairness results under the term Fact Sheets 360. So again, also here, IBM said we need a basis and where we rather want to share with others, and that helps all of us. So the efforts which we invested here, we're going to share it because it will serve the purpose. I think that was a large portion of Alessandro's presentation when talking about trust in AI. On the opposite, it's almost clear that a private company like IBM can only survive, now we are back to Schumpeter, if there is an area next to these common areas where a company like IBM and also a small company would need an area where you can create a competitive advantage to differentiate compared to your competitors. And that's where you make your earnings, basically. So, and there, now going back to IP, we have, and this is almost a standard, which we find in many situations, where we have like two legs or two columns where these competitive advantages can be based on. And one column is what we call factual protection strategies. This is sort of the ordinary way of doing business and to create differentiation. But with driving a link to IP, that can also already be that you decide to keep something secret. For example, I don't know, maybe the source code of your algorithm. And you might even take specific action to keep it secret. For example, by somehow securitizing your code and your source code. And that might even be the basis then going further on to the legal perspective of it for something which you later would use as a trade secret. Here we would have a combination of factual strategy, keeping it physically secret, and then using a legal instrument in that case under the term trade secrets, where you could even rely on some law to protect it additionally, next to just keeping it secret. And of course, all the other industrial property law as we know it from today would come up here in the sort of second column, the legal protection strategies, like getting a patent on an invention, and so on. Now, when we talk about AI, I think there comes a second view on that, because and I think that was part of the first session you had. Quite some energy was sort of put into the analysis, okay, where's the current law system? How can you interpret the existing laws, and sort of what flexibility do you still have in there? There comes in the discussion that was also right now in the chat on the table. So who is the inventor? Can an inventor be not natural? Yeah, under the current law terms of most legal regions in the world, it's not, because there's a certain understanding what an inventor should be. Also what a patent owner should be or could be. So a patent owner can be for example, a legal person, but like a company, but not an inventor. Inventor has to be a natural person. But of course, now you could discuss, especially when we get into these new technologies, is our current law fit to state, so to fit this new era that will be coming up? So AI, for some, is just a tool, but many futurists think it will be, the effects of it will be much more than just using a new tool for some general problems. Yeah. So so we could argue, well, is it just enough to sort of interpret the current framework, legal frameworks and boundaries? Or is it sort of time to start a discussion that, of course, has to somehow compete with the technical speed of development in terms of, okay, what do we want to have in the future? For example, do we want to have like let's say an artificial person that becomes a new category in law and that can own things, or that is somehow eligible to create things? And now we are in the IP world. So can these new personalities create something, and would we like to have a certain law that somehow deals with it? I'm not talking about whether I'm supporting this or not, but I think we need it's very good to have a discussion about it, and on the right level. So not only on the how to interpret the current law, but also where do we want to go to? So do we want patents on this type of new forefront technologies? As Wipo mentioned it, as term, I mean, and what kind of IP would we like to have there, or what kind of rules or boundaries would we like to have there, including ethical standards? And that could also include, for example, and that is sort of the part of the societies that maybe create new laws to say, okay, what kind of economy do we think is useful here? For example, what space would we like to have in the commons? For example, data coming from patients in hospitals, is that really something which we would like to have exclusively in the left area here? Or is that something which we prefer to have on the right-hand side here of this column, of this chart? And especially when we maybe might design then something that says, okay, how can we keep something common, and how can we keep something, an area, or give instruments to companies that they can still create their temporary monopoly gains? And that might be to extend the current IP law, or to clarify it with regard to the new to the new technologies we are facing. And that might also be, and some of course, obviously some regions are already trying this, for example, to create rules and regulations on how to deal with data. And from an economic point of view, it would just be good to include sort of this economic view somehow represented by this chart, to say, no, if we talk about commons, please also talk about where should the temporary monopoly gains, the competitive advantages area be for the companies. Sort of where is their playing zone where they're entitled to work on these advantages, and where not. And that sort of, this is a theoretical statement, and to make it more practical, what would that be? For example, one element is, what are the technical means, for example, that you can maybe use when you think about factual and legal protection strategies. And Naomi will take over and still show you some slides about some research at HSG that goes into that direction.
Great, thanks, Martin. So this goes back to the potential importance of models. So as we heard from the practitioners, using some of these from open source is obviously very interesting. And then there's that option of licensing. But if we wanted to take this thought of, laying open your research more generally, like you would have with a regular patent, and if we could apply it to these models to make them more shareable and really advance research on them, we at the moment are still facing some technical issues with this. So this is something that would have to evolve in tandem with legal measures that you could have for protection. So at the moment, because these models are exceptionally large, so as I mentioned, the extreme example of GPT-3 with its 175 billion parameters, there are no technical ways to determine if somebody has misappropriated one of these models. Which is probably also why when Tesla sued one of its employees that left to go work at a Chinese competitor, Xiaopeng, they ultimately ended up settling in court, and there was no definitive explanation of whether certain IP pertaining to the autonomous driving AI systems that Tesla was developing were actually taken by this employee. So there are two specific ways that AI researchers are currently working on trying to solve the technical aspects of how to really trace your models. One of these is watermarking, which is where you essentially try to embed a watermark within all of these 175 billion parameters of neural network weights. And then you would have a second method where you could check whether a network that you think might have been misappropriated was actually yours by seeing whether your watermark is still in there. And then a different approach, which is being developed by our computer science colleagues here at our new computer science department at the university, is what they call, and this is rather complicated, so I'll try to explain the essence of it, is representation learning with deep neural networks. And essentially what this is to sort of try to get a fingerprint, or if you will, a DNA sequence of a particular model. So if you have been training your model, you should be able to, hopefully is the idea anyway, derive a unique identity for this model based on how it was trained and with which data. So at least in theory, it would be possible that Martin and I are trying to develop some sort of, let's say, computer vision application, and we start with two different data sets, but because we're trying to solve the same problem, we would end up with a model at the end that's virtually identical. And so it'd be kind of difficult to determine if I ended up taking Martin's model and working on it a little bit more myself, so to obfuscate that I had misappropriated it, or whether we just happened to come at the same conclusion, but from two different points. And so this method of trying to learn these representations of the models would be one way to technically solve this issue of how you can actually trace the origins of a particular machine learning model.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi, to conclude. And that would, and just to make an example, that could give you or give us an instrument to work with these models like a bit with copyright, sort of, where you talk about similarity, and you could decide, okay, if you have your model and someone else is using it, you with a watermark, you could first of all check who is using it, and second, you would have something like a similarity index or ratio on basis of which you could say, okay, until up to a certain level of this similarity, you could say, well, it was used in a way that it's still part of, goes back to the origin source. And with applying the right legal instrument, then you could apply a new legal instrument, a bit like copyright, saying, okay, it's still similar, so we think it was used, and then you can talk about a license or other misuse of elements we know. And if it's not similar, you could say, well, it's not similar, so it's something on its own. Yeah. So and with an instrument like this, combination of technical means and the right legal instruments next to that, you could face sort of these new technologies and defining, okay, where do we give space for differentiation, competitive advantage, for proprietary innovation, and where do we want to have open innovation, for example, to foster the use of, for example, data and foster different approaches, different creativities, for example, with health data coming from hospitals, for example, from patients, where you would generate a big base, or as mentioned by IBM, where you want to create a good basis for trusting AI and setting certain ethical standards. And opposite to that, we would talk about an area which we designed to create proprietary innovation and and giving sort of that economic space to companies where they're still where they can sort of thrive for excellence and thrive for differentiation, and where they can compete with of course with the goal of making their earnings. Yeah. And I think we conclude with that, Naomi and myself. And I don't know how you, and give back to Peter and Florent, who I guess want to close and enter the panel or Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really fascinating. A very good feat of leading from the fundamentals of IP protection and underlying economic rationales to the particularities of AI IP, and then concluding with the most fascinating work of yours on new ways of treating infringement, and which also I think may change the parameters for how we have to protect intangibles in this area. I'm also very much looking forward to our discussions next year at the closed door workshop on that, where we get into the how do we go forward. That will certainly play an important role there. We are a good 10 minutes behind schedule, which is not that bad for a 3 hours workshop. I'd suggest we take an extra 10 minutes until 6:10 if the speakers have these extra 10 minutes, and then we have a good 15 minutes to discuss. And I think this is of course not enough for all the points, but we can at least engage in some sort of dialogue right away, and there will be additional opportunities later on. My first question would go, I think, to the three company representatives, but I do see that Florent has one, and I don't want to monopolize.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
If just as you want. I mean, go out with yours. Fire away. Okay. That was a benign scenario that Naomi and Martin drew in a sense. There's the sharing part, and then there is the exclusivity part, and we have to have both, because only then we get the right, the right kind of combination for dynamic efficiency, and that's hopefully so. But I would wish to ask Michael Schröder from kind of the SME, the small guy's perspective. Do you think that the larger companies do engage in the right form or the right levels of selective sharing? It's clear that they're sharing via licenses, for example, will always be selective, but are they at the right level or headed towards the right level? These are developing markets, of course. And then I would like to hear the same or the answers to the same question from Michael May and Alessandro Curioni. Do they think that they, as representatives of the big guys, engage in sufficient sharing, or is maybe also due to the developing phase of the markets, are we seeing overall too much protective exclusivity? Michael Schröder, please.
Yeah, so okay, it's a good question. I have never thought about if they're doing enough in that sense. So my perspective may be also a bit tainted from, since I come from research. I always relied heavily on what's available, let's say, more or less freely or open in that sense. I come from an environment where we live on open data, or but then again, for example, in genetics, we were then protecting our genetic data because it was very difficult to kind of publicize it. And then you had to think about how do we share it with others' researchers. That being said, I think from my personal view there, I'm still sometimes thinking, wow, like it's kind of unprecedented that so many large companies are donating so much know-how to the general public, let's say. That's something we have to keep in mind. That I think I'm not an expert, but I think this is kind of something of our times now, right? This is nothing that has been done before. And that being said, the example mentioned by Naomi Hefner is a great example that I can go very quickly the other way. That now they have just the talent, that the know-how about how to drive forward these technologies, and basically they are exploiting it, right, to the more complex models. Right, very complex models. They are just offered via APIs. For example, if you think about the Azure platforms, IBM computing platforms, Microsoft, Google Cloud, then basically the big trend is that I'm not even trying to give machine learning models to or source code to the companies, but I'm just offering a service that can now translate speech into text, or like between languages, and then you just there behind there's lots of different models that are working, and then you pay how much times you call these models, right? And there, I think there you can already see there's a certain gap, because there are a lot of small players on the market that basically small companies that make this model recognition for other smaller companies, let's say. And they sometimes think I struggle to keep up with the big players, of course. But I cannot judge now if they are doing enough or not, right? I'm not in the position in that sense, because it's still there's this feeling that, wow, they have given a lot, right? Obviously, there's an afterthought, right? They always profit because people want to use these technologies afterwards, right?
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the two other speakers, there is Peter Thompson from Novartis who has a little add-on on the topic, and maybe we hear that before we have the two speakers reply to all of it.
Well, hello.
Thompson,
hello. Thank you. Well, I have just one consideration question for this big topic, open innovation versus proprietary protection of innovative solutions. I mean, I see there is a clear need to define areas where you leave it more to open innovation and areas where you leave it more to proprietary. But I mean, isn't it the situation that open innovation does only really work in areas where all the players in the field, in the market, are in a similar position with regard to needing access to a particular information, but also contributing to it. But it does not very well work in areas or markets where you have a great asymmetry towards providers and users of certain technical solutions. And I would be interested particularly in the economic view of the speakers.
A comment?
Go ahead, Martin.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in this situation you're describing, Peter Thompson, it sounds really obvious. Okay, you have a common need. In the way how I think IBM phrased it in the beginning, talking about how can we create a basis for trusting into AI and set the right framework. I think there we, I guess, have likely this kind of situation. So that's probably one reason why they opened it up, their efforts here. But open does not necessarily mean it's for free. If you think of the open source software movement, it's not just a free lunch. It's you enter a contract saying, well, let's share something, but when you do this, you agree to a certain rule framework that is basically, in that case, open source is created to make sure it remains open, or that the contributions are somehow in there can still be shared. And I would even, I guess I can still make this point to Michael from Siemens. Open can also mean you license it. You license your results to like a model or a platform to other parties. But imagine you license your AI model to someone else. One flaw we realize today, or the companies that considering doing this, they say, how can we control it, whether someone really used our model or to what extent? So, and for that reason, a technical mean there would be really helpful to sort of really technically or from the factual point of view, make sure I can control it, whether it's used and to what extent it is used. And in that case, you would probably enter like a contractual agreement, bilateral or multilateral agreement, or maybe even unilateral agreement. And you wouldn't maybe need an extra law. And this could just be another level to consider, is saying, okay, how can we maybe decrease the entry barriers? Because all this type of contracts now we have a high barrier of entry barriers to negotiate the contracts and all these kind of things. And they are more suitable to large companies with a lot of experience in this kind of skills than to small companies. So a legal perspective, and for example, European Commission is currently talking about these kind of things. Can we maybe decrease the barriers for entering these kind of agreements compared to creating maybe some legal framework, general legal framework that sort of softens the entry barrier?
Alessandro Corioni,
yeah.
Michael May, and then Florent Touvenin. Mr. Corioni, would you want to, sorry, unmute? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Look, definitely right, open and business are not, and create value, you know, are not something that goes one against the other. And indeed, as was well said, open source software place, right, is a very good example of that. In the case of AI, it is very, very, very important to create trust and transparencies, because, you know, the problem associated to the to missing trust or transparencies are connected, directly connected to kill a business. So it is very important for the society, but is also very important for the business to push this thing forward. And you know, if then your business is to deliver some engines as a service, or to deliver the platform that allow you to do these things simply, easily, and in a much more secure way, you know, the two things are very, very, very compatible. Yeah, but I do strongly believe that, especially in this emerging field that require to have, you know, the right rules developed, and require to have the right interaction between partners to get the rules that are accepted to everybody, that then, you know, allow to develop a market. The open piece is really very, very crucial.
Michael May.
Yeah, a bit hard to say for me whether we engage enough. I think in AI, there is a culture of sharing a lot. I mean, a lot of the research results, including what at Siemens Research is done, get published. Not everything is patented, but more on the application side, where you see a definite advantage in getting a patent in some automation domain or energy domain. And in that sense, I feel it's a quite open part of research, so that academic people can see what is done. On the other hand, of course, Siemens is a company who is eager to patent and patents a lot because we see value in that. But that's more on the domain than on the foundational technology, I think.
Also an interesting distinction, yeah. Florent?
Yes, thanks a lot. I actually just wanted to ask a question to Michael, but maybe I can start off with a quick comment. I think the analogy to open source software is good to some extent, but it doesn't work, you know, very well, because we all know that, of course, the idea of open source software is based on the fact that the source code is, in almost all cases, protected by copyright. which is not the case with regard to data. So when it is about sharing data and making data accessible, we have other problems, because once the data is out, we don't have any sort of protection anymore, because we lack the character of secrets, which is, one of the most basic requirements for relying on trade secrets. There are some workarounds, but I think the situation is clearly more complicated than with regard to open source. When you want to grant access, and also the university of course is subject to that movement that requires data to be as open as possible. And even here we need to start thinking about what we can actually make accessible and what we should protect based on some sort of trade secrets, provided, which is unsure, that trade secrets law even apply to research data at universities. So that was just a quick comment. I actually wanted to ask Michael maybe to kind of broaden the perspective. Given that Ernie is a Swiss company which is very active in the field of AI across the globe, I'm sure that you already have had a closer look at the draft EU AI Act. And I would be very interested in knowing, given that Switzerland has not yet developed their policy with regard to the regulation of AI. Now, how do you approach the situation? Now, would you look for having a similar framework in Switzerland, or do you say, EU is just just one market that we're after? We would look for, more leeway for innovation. What's your perspective on as a Swiss company being active in the field, on what's going on, not going on in Switzerland, and going on very much on the European level?
Wow, that's a question. So maybe I have to explain a bit quickly. I am Swiss, but I basically relocated to Switzerland 6 months ago. I've been living in Spain and Germany for almost 12 years before. So I maybe don't have this very much this hat on which you're asking. So what I'm saying is in the end, we are supporting clients across the globe. Also, basically, you always have to adapt to the local, let's say, specificities. But as a software deliverer, we are mostly concerned with, let's say, technical problems, and not that of the intellectual property. So mostly it's maybe then outsourced or done by our clients themselves. That being said, it's the second part of your question was if how Switzerland should react, right? So I think from my personal point of view, we are just very much also influenced by what's done in the European Union, right? So in the end, the regulations that are being realized in the European Union will very much impact how we do business, because lots of our clients are, even if they are Swiss companies, they are active on the European Union side. So there is not much room for doing things very specially or another way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, pursuing that very interesting question, but also doing the nasty job of the timekeeper. I would suggest to not, overstretch the patience of our speakers and audience. I would suggest that we make a comment on the EU's current legal framework, as Florent mentioned, to make that the topic of the final round of our speakers. If you have a view on whether the EU is headed in the right direction regarding AI and ethical aspects and more generally the regulatory aspects that the EU is putting in place regarding AI, and whether you think we should do the same in Switzerland. Maybe we can have a series of final comments on that if you want to, or any other topic you feel is important to mention as part of your final round. Alessandro Corioni, I'm sure you do have a view on the EU legal framework and the EU AI expert group.
Yeah, yes, listen, as I was telling in my presentation, we have been, let's say, participating, give our inputs, and, I do believe that the direction is the right one. But as I was saying, it's not something that you can say, okay, we have this, let's stop. Should be a continuous discussion, improvement, and so on and so forth, because the field is moving so fast. And, sometimes it's even difficult to keep track on what could be the next problem or danger. Yeah, and regarding the things of Switzerland, look, I do think that Switzerland has its own peculiarities, and we have been working. We have some discussion with the Swiss Academy of Technology Science on this. To me, it is a nonsense to have something that is too different from the European one, because most of the interaction are still there, but there are some peculiarities that eventually maybe one would like to double down.
Thank you. Alisa, what's your take? What does Wipo think, the global organization? What's the global view on that?
Well, I mean, we at Wipo, we don't really have an opinion because we are really guided by our member states. So it's a bit of a cop-out, but
you maybe have one.
I have no, I have no personal opinions. Not in this position. No, we are keeping an eye out on what the other jurisdictions are doing, particularly, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about DABUS. We've been watching that as well, and I think that will probably come to the fore maybe internationally pretty soon. But I guess the overall climate of multilateralism is very difficult at the moment. So it's very difficult for us to implement anything that will around AI. And I think that probably the way things are happening at the national level at various jurisdictions is the way it's going to happen. So it's very difficult for us at an international level to kind of make anything happen in that respect.
Interesting. So the EU needed as a locomotive, maybe. Yeah,
yeah, in the EU and the US, and you know, there's a lot of different approaches happening at the moment.
Yeah, Michael May, do you think?
I think first that there is a discussion that helps, because we need clarity on how to approach the issues of trust standardization. This is good. A worry is about the current discussion. I would say at EU level, we need a maybe even clearer risk-based discussion and distinguish between AI systems that might be harmful and some that are really not, and then break this down to clear definitions, which is in which categories. So where I'm sometimes afraid that we have unclear definition, and then some not really dangerous, let's say predictive maintenance application get in a category where you have to do a lot of documenting, a lot to do of proving, which is not really necessary because they are not more dangerous than things which are already out. So this depends on how you do it, how clear your definitions are, and that you really have clear risk-based criteria. But in general, that there is a discussion, it's good, because trust is an issue also because of user acceptance.
Well, it's sector specificity, very important, certainly very important aspect there. Martin Bada.
Yeah, I think we had a great discussion about this topic, combining the technical and maybe some economic and legal aspects. And I was also now watching the chat a little bit, and I think this would be my suggestion to our peer group here, is to differentiate between the levels we are talking about. So are we talking about improving the law or interpreting the law in the different regions on the current level? Or do we maybe would like, at least as an experiment, to get ahead and look on it from a more macro view? That doesn't mean that we can solve all these issues. As this one example showed, maybe you need some technical means to implement something, but it might also include to discuss whether we are facing a third type of personality, maybe an artificial personality, and then to discuss what would that mean. And maybe that would solve already many little discussions we have here, but it might also support sort of the discussion of a new level, which some people in the society might feel very frightening about, and some might say, well, this could be a cool concept to implement and to solve a lot of issues with these new technologies.
This is certainly an aspect not that much present in the present EU regulatory proposals.
It's not there at
so
all.
That would
And maybe so I can one last thing I can add from a macroeconomic point of view, especially when we talk about Switzerland and maybe the European region. There are some other regions in the world that just do it what they want to do and to support their economic strengths and their political goals. One is in the east and one is in the west from us. So we're not alone.
Naomi Hefner, what should we do? American way or EU way or nothing at all? Or
well,
what's the solution?
Surely, much like with anything else, we'll go the some sort of middle way and wait a bit, and it usually tends to work out pretty okay for Switzerland. So that's the good news. I don't have too much to add. I think, yeah, I do think that the approach of picking out best practices from the other examples that we do have seems to work well. And so that's something I would encourage, and obviously stay in dialogue with the actual practitioners to see where their issues are heading and how we can best support them in making sure that the technology advances as best as possible.
Very good. So I think you sound a very good chord for the end of this workshop, namely ongoing dialogue. We are very much looking forward to being in touch with you over the next couple of months and to see all speakers again next summer in the on-site closed-door workshop with the Intellectual Property Institute. And we hope to maybe see you in the audience and in any case, our audience again for our third online workshop early in 2022, where we will be looking at agency practice in the field. So how do agencies employ, or how should agencies employ such tools? I think it's going to be very interesting again. And for today, many thanks, first and foremost, to all speakers. That was really great, all the content you put to the table. Many thanks you for the patience, and also the audience for the patience. That has been a lot of content in quite a short period of time, but I think it was great. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, maybe a glass of wine after so much AI and IP. Bye-bye. Thank you.